When you're finding trig ratios outside of first quadrant angles, it's a little bit more complicated because you have to use the tools that you have for finding angles less than pi by 2 in the first quadrant, and you also have to use the cast rule. So it's kind of combining those two ideas. So first off, what tools can we use to find exact values for angles? Well, even if it's outside of pi by 2, if you are looking at angles like 0, pi by 2, pi, 3 pi by 2, 2 pi, 4 pi, 10 pi, a million pi, you can use sine and cos graphs to predict the values really easily. So for example, if I have sine of pi I'm looking for, I go to my sine graph and I go to where theta equals pi, and that gives me a y value of 0. If I wanted to know sine pi by 2, or let's make it 3 pi by 2 because that's outside of the pi by 2, 3 pi by 2 would give us a ratio of -1. So even though you're outside the first quadrant, if you have values like 0, pi by 2, pi, 3 pi by 2, 2 pi, etc., you are using your sine and cos graph to find the ratios. Same goes for cosine. If, however, you are looking for any of the multiples of pi by 4, pi by 3, or pi by 6, you will be using your special triangles. Just to review on how to use those, you have your 45, 45, 90, or pi by 4, pi by 4, pi by 2 triangle, which has side lengths 1, 1, root 2, and it is isosceles, so two of the sides are the same length. And you have your pi by 6, pi by 3, pi by 2 triangle, which has side lengths 1, root 3, and 2. So if I asked you something like, what is cos pi by 6, that's a first quadrant angle. That's the same as cos of 30 degrees. You would go over to your triangle, you would look at pi by 6, and you would look for the adjacent and the hypotenuse, which would give us root 3 over 2. So now we are going to be looking at a question like tan 7 pi by 4. And that's outside, 7 pi by 4 is outside of the first quadrant. So there's a few steps we need to go through to tackle that. So first, draw your angle in standard position. 7 pi by 4 is actually in the fourth quadrant, because remember on your angle in standard position diagram, you're starting at 0 and you're rotating up through, this is pi by 2 or 90 degrees, this is pi, half a rotation, this is 1.5 pi and 2 pi, and it goes on forever around like that, with the angle in standard position rotating, starting at the positive x-axis and rotating any number of times that you want. So it can also rotate backwards, so clockwise with a negative angle of rotation. If we want 7 pi by 4, it's going to actually end up in this quadrant here, because 3 pi by 2, if you think of that as something out of 4, this is 6 pi out of 4 if I double the top and the bottom, and 2 pi is the same as 8 pi by 4. So 7 pi by 4 would be in between. Or you can think of it as 2 pi and you've taken away that pi by 4 slice. So we call that angle pi by 4 the related angle, and that's the acute angle it makes with the x-axis. So this is 7 pi by 4, and that's my angle in standard position. And the cast rule tells us that in that fourth quadrant where my angle is, that only cosine is positive. So just a quick review of the cast rule. Cosine's positive in the fourth quadrant. All ratios are positive in the fourth quadrant. Only sine in the second is positive, and only tan in the third is positive. So here we have figured out something very important. We know that tan of 7 pi by 4 is going to be the same as negative tan pi by 4, where this pi by 4 was just the related angle that we found with the positive x-axis. And we just really determined what the sign was going to be, that it was going to be negative. So now we need the tan pi by 4 ratio, so we can look at our special triangle. This is the opposite, this is the adjacent. Tan is just the opposite over the adjacent. So 1 over 1, tan pi by 4 is just equal to 1, which means that tan of 7 pi by 4 is equal to -1. So when you're working with angles outside of the first quadrant, all you're really doing is finding the ratios using your special triangles if it has a denominator of 4, 3, or 6, and then using your cast rule to decide is it positive or negative. If you have an angle that's a multiple of 0, pi, pi by 2, then you're looking at the sine or cos graph or the tan graph possibly.